The views expressed and the opinions given by the individual host and their guests do not necessarily reflect those of Para-X, its affiliates, or its sponsors.
Step outside of your comfort zone. See the world with a whole new perspective. Join us and experience the unexplained on the Paranormal View.
And welcome everybody right here to the Paranormal View on the Para-X Radio Network. I want to thank everyone for being with us tonight. Those in the chat room and those listening from around the world, we appreciate each and every one. If you are listening from somewhere around the world, you'd like to come over to the chat room. It's at paraxradionetwork.com and click on the chat now button and follow directions, and you'll be in with all these wonderful people, and you can chat with them and you can ask questions, and we will get those answered for you. And if you're listening from somewhere else around the world and you do not want to come into the chat room, you can send us a question by sending it to the Paranormal View what is it, Barbara?
At Gmail?
At Gmail, paranormalview@gmail.com. We will get those answered for you. All right, we have with us tonight Barbara Duncan.
Hello, everybody from Smoky, California.
Yeah, it is pretty bad out there, isn't it? Is it still hazy like it was the other day when you posted a photo?
It's just hazy right now. No Martian sky today.
No Martian sky.
Blade Runner, so many people were saying.
Seriously, it went from at 7 o'clock in the morning when I got up to go to work, the sky was really just sort of dark gray. And then it turned to like a tomato red, and then it went to a blood red, and then it went to a crimson red. So by 11:30, it was really spooky Halloween style. Martian. Yeah.
Wow. We got with us Jeffrey Gould.
Hello, hello. It was only kind of weirdly orange overcast here, and it was like everything was sepia tone. It's like the beginning of The Wizard of Oz.
Oh, wow. All right, we got a great guest, and we got a lot of questions for this person tonight. So, Jeff, you got all the info to introduce our guest?
Yes. Yep. Tonight our new guest is Christopher Balzano. He's a writer, researcher, folklorist, and current host of the podcast Tripping on Legends, and the director of Massachusetts Paranormal Crossroads. Christopher is the author of several books about regional hauntings focused on around the Bridgewater Triangle, as well as several collections of true ghost stories and how-to paranormal books, as well as appearing on television shows to comment on ghosts and urban legends. And across the country, he's appeared on radio stations and throughout the internet, widely being considered the leading researcher into Marla Brooks' favorites, Pukwudgies. And formerly, Christopher ran the paranormal news at Ghostvillage and headed up Ghostvillage for Kids, which just sounds creepy. His new book, Florida's Haunted Love Stories, focuses on haunted legends in the Sunshine State that have connections to love. So welcome, Christopher Balzano.
Thank you very much. And I'm in Florida where every night the sky is weird.
I have to wonder with a how-to paranormal book, that isn't like the meme of the guy reading the book saying, is there life after death? And he opens it, it says, step 1, die.
It's about that well written, I would say. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Wow.
Well, you could start off with the Handbook of the Dead, but
Hey.
Of the recently deceased.
Of the recently deceased, yeah.
No, those are, it's interesting because those two books, it's Picture Yourself Ghost Hunting, which is a great book, and I always get excited when people tell me that they still buy copies of it to train their paranormal investigators. And I'm like, that's amazing. And then I'd have Picture Yourself Capturing Ghosts on Film, which I'm not that proud of. We were talking before air, and in writing those two books, I really became, I would say, disillusioned with the paranormal, and it actually put me on the path that I'm on right now in the way that I approach the paranormal and spooky things. So,
such as?
Well, I mean, why did it change me?
Well, that and how did it change you?
Yeah. Well, the first thing is in writing that book, I really had to take a step back for some sections of it and become critical of what was going on in the paranormal field. And one of those, one of the more entertaining but also really difficult chapters to write was on ghost hunters and ghost hunting teams and paranormal teams and their ideas. And it was one of those, I've never been part of a team. I've investigated since 1994, probably from, I would say, 94 to 2015, 2014. And I never was part of a group because the dynamics were just too sketchy for me. And I liked surrounding myself with good people, going out and doing what needed to be done, and then leaving them, and not having to rely on whether we were wearing the same shirt or, the politics of groups. But also the other thing is as I was writing those books and kind of in the wake after it, I really became kind of soured on equipment, not only just the science of the paranormal, but also, the heavy reliance on equipment and the focus on the gathering of evidence. And I can understand it, and I don't push those people off, or I don't say I don't enjoy what they're doing or they're being silly or anything like that. It's just, for me, I found that it was an empty pursuit, that for all that we were doing in terms of trying to capture ghosts, provide evidence of ghosts, try to make sense of it, we were collecting a lot of data, and there was very rarely analysis of it. And more importantly, we were going into places that could be haunted, and we were relying so heavily on the 23 pieces of equipment we had that we didn't use our eyes, and we didn't use our senses, and we didn't use our sixth sense. We were ignoring that gut feeling because that's something that you can't present to people. Like, I felt as if there was someone watching me. Like, have you ever heard of a haunted location where something like that isn't said, and yet we push that off? We use it as a way to say that a place is haunted. Then we go in there and we ignore the fact that what led us there were these people's stories, which, well, I can't take your story for face value because I have to find evidence of it. And so, for a while I dropped out, and then, once you start doing the paranormal, it continues to call to you. And I really had to find my niche, and I found that my niche was legend tripping. And that is going to a location, doing a ridiculous amount of research ahead of time, trying to find out the history of this haunted story, this ghost story that might be in a location, going to the site, using some kind of trigger that matches the legend to try and spring something and have whatever the legend is happen to you, and then just experiencing it. And then afterwards reporting that, and maybe even allowing the audience to come in and see what you experienced to the best of your ability. And once I started to do that, I was having more paranormal experiences, a lot more fun, and connecting with people in a way that I hadn't before.
Yeah, I didn't get into it until like 2008. And once I did, I was able to go to different places because shortly after I got into it in 2000, as a matter of fact, it was in the fall, I started doing this radio show. They asked me to do it, and I said, who, me? I don't know anything about ghosts or anything. And but they talked me into it, and I started doing the show. Since then, I've been able to go to a lot of different places. There's only certain people that I affiliate with as far as going to places to do things with. I don't believe in all the electronics. The only thing I use is a recorder. And everything else, I mean, it's a lot of the gadgets is nice, but to me, like you said, you can't prove a lot of it.
Yeah.
If I catch
and
one,
I think recorders like video cameras, cameras and audio tape is important because it's documenting what you're there, why you're there, documenting what you're doing, and then you may actually find a little something afterwards after you get home.
Right. And I've had my share of EVPs, that I've captured, and a lot of it is really good. A lot of times, people will take and play something and try and tell you everything about it, and well, maybe, but it's not, you can't really say that's what it was.
Right.
But a lot of the stuff
our general rule of thumb is if we don't hear it plugged into the car stereo on the way home, we don't go digging for it, and sometimes, especially in the early days, what we would do is if we had a very specific little section, we would put that out as a separate little like mini episode and be like, hey, you guys want to break this down? You guys want to find stuff in it? Perfectly fine. Here's what we found when we first listened to it. And I've gotten more mind-blowing EVPs being a legend tripper than as an investigator.
Right. Well, there's with your books, and I was going through a lot of those, and I have a lot of them to talk about.
Excellent.
I'll talk to you a little bit later about when I was living in Daytona. I was about 15, and the Tomoka Light. The first time I was down there, my uncle and a couple of my cousins took me down there, and it's supposed to be from the last street light to the telephone booth at the entrance of the park. That's about a 3-mile stretch of road. And you'd drive up and down it and turn your headlights off and on, and a light would come on behind you, go out, come on in front of you. It would change shapes, colors, and stuff like that. I never tried to chase it.
The old Dixie Highway.
Yep, and I never tried to chase it. But the first night they took me out, I guess my 2 cousins was up with my uncle in the front seat, and I was in the back seat. And it was in a convertible, and they had the back window unzipped. And Roy started hollering, there it is. And I looked out the back window, and here comes this big red light coming down the road. And all you could see was my feet sticking out of the front seat.
And I don't want to get too personal if you don't want to share it, but what year was that?
That was in 1964, I believe, something like that.
Okay. So, a few years later, they changed the height of the bridge. And since they changed the height of the bridge, and I can tell you the full story if you want, we can share it. Since they changed the height of the bridge at that location, people no longer see those lights. They still see them in the woods. They still see them in the park. They still see them down the street in Bungalow Creek, where with the Fairchild Oak, the suicide tree. So it's funny that's a really great example of we changed the bridge so people don't see the lights anymore. So we totally proved that legend was fake. Yeah, but what about the lights that are right there that people see?
Right.
Well, that's probably just well, what about the lights that are down the street? What about the lights that are seen on the water right over there? Well, that's probably not. It's one of those funny things. It's if you can prove one aspect of a haunting or a haunted legend negative, people feel that means then therefore the entire thing is wrong. Like if you have a fraud who investigates, if a place, think of some of the famous, hauntings and cases, and one person who's associated with it has been proven to have lied about something or be a fraud, then people actually assume that the entire thing is, which is, hilarious because we really don't do that in most other things in life.
Well, the one thing that got me, going out there at night is totally different. So
right.
I was in the Boy Scouts, and there was 3 other guys, and they wanted to get their 20-mile hike merit badge. And I was living in Harbor Oaks at the time. And we hiked from Harbor Oaks out to the campground, and they wouldn't let us stay all night in the campground. They said, Scoutmaster's not with you, you can't come in. So we walked about halfway back down where the park entrance sign is, and there's a little road that'll run over to the river from there. It's not very far. So we couldn't walk all the way back. It was already late in the evening, and we decided we had our sleeping bags. We was going to go down toward the river and camp right there. And it got dark. We couldn't get a fire started because the dew was on the ground. Everything was wet. And we just got in our sleeping bags. And everything's real quiet. And all of a sudden, I hear like 4 or 5 kids, maybe 6, on bicycles pedaling real slow down the road. You could hear them talking. You could hear them pedaling the bicycles. And this other guy says, "Hey, let's go scare them." Well, we jumped up and run up to the road. We looked down to the right, and you could see the light and telephone booth. Nothing on the road. We looked down to the left, and you could see all the way down to the last street light, or the red light in the town part down there. And nobody was on the road. And it's swamp on both sides. Kids ain't going to go off in the swamp. And they did not have time to pedal anywhere else, because it only took us just a minute to run up to the road, and they was going real slow on the bicycles. You could hear them. And all of a sudden, I seen light go out, and then a light come on. It started coming down the road, and I started hollering. The guy said, "There's the light, there's the light." And we run back down to the river and stood there for about an hour. Never seen anything go by. One car later on went by, and so we got in sleeping bags and went to sleep. But it wasn't just one person heard these kids on the bicycles, and they wasn't there when we went up there. So I have no idea what that was.
Wow. That's people have had those kind of really crazy things all up and down that Ormond Beach area, and the funny thing is that if you look at the history of it, right? So that's one of the things I do. That has got to be one of the most cursed sections of Florida. And when I say cursed, you can just kind of casually throw that thing out. But it was actually something that I was doing a presentation for a library, and they wanted to do haunted curses of Florida. And I put all the Tomoki stuff together, and it was just too long. It would have taken the entire night, because if you look at the history of that area, while other places at that same exact time, while other places were succeeding, all across Florida, that little section, that little strip, all the way from, a little bit outside Jacksonville, all the way down to Daytona and beyond, they couldn't, their plantations were never successful.
Right.
They would have murder after murder. They would have these unexplained suicides, which is how you get the Fairchild Oak, which is right there. But then also, they seem to lead the world, or America, in slave revolts. It was like the one place in Florida that time and time again, slaves were revolting against their overseers. And it's one of the stories we were able to break was of, and they just call him the overseer, and it was this guy by the name of Huey, and he was known absolutely horrible. I mean, he was like in a long line of horrible decisions that the plantation owner made. And Captain James Ormond, who it's all that area is named for. And the story goes that either he was really drunk and none of the slaves went to help him, or that they actually killed him. But he died in that water. He died on that river, and the boat that is used to carry him, as well as the his lights going over that stretch of water onto the beach. People have seen him actually come onto the beach. When we went there, my co-host got drunk. I mean, the only way to explain it is that she felt almost immediately intoxicated and drunk, and that continued as we walked up and down the beach until we actually left the area. And she was like, "I can't." It's like it just lifted from me. So there really is a dark cloud that kind of lays over that section of Florida.
Yes, it is. And
now,
although they make great hot sauce. No, have you had the Tomoki hot sauce?
No.
It is ridiculously good. I actually had to order some online during the quarantine because I've run out of mine. Because to them, the legend of why those ghost lights are there, and the story of Tomoki is sold, right? I mean, mainly because it was designed to do that, right? It's not a real story. It's a man who they said the gods themselves dropped water where the Tomoka State Park is, and Tomoki stole a cup, and he was stealing this eternal godly water for himself when he wasn't supposed to, and it offended all of his tribe so much that a huge war raged, right? And he was nearly indivisible. whatever that word is, until the woman he loved, Olita, was able to shoot him with a poison arrow. And they kind of shot each other at the same time, and they both ended up dying. And that's what they said, like, now this water is good, but it won't make you live forever if you drink it. And they published that story, and they create spoilers. It doesn't exist. It's not real. It was invented by the guy who opened the park, and he wanted to draw people in, and he wanted to, have this kind of, if you've ever been there, there's a huge statue, and they wanted something sellable, right? It's Florida. It's, that's what they do best is sell attractions. And so they invented this story, and they invented this Tomoki to brand that area and have people come there and experience that legend. And along the way, make really good hot sauce.
Wow.
I guess that's the origin of the Fountain of Youth story, or they were tapping into that.
Well, right, exactly. I keep in mind, when I say they created, I'm talking about like in the 1950s.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And so Florida already definitely had a reputation as being the place where the Fountain of Youth is. So you'll find that story popping up pretty much anywhere there's a spring around Florida. They'll say, this is potentially the Fountain of Youth, and here's an excellent story that goes with it.
Okay.
Wow.
Bizarre.
Now,
But they make good hot dogs.
I noticed on your
Fountain of Youth, have a drink of that and a hot dog, Yeah.
Yeah, do you know what? I'll be honest with you. Every time I take some of that hot sauce, I feel it takes a few years off of my life. It's that good and spicy. This is a big commercial. You're going to get them first as a sponsor for the show now.
Well, at least they ought to send us some hot dogs.
Yeah, let us try them out anyway. On your legend tripping site, you have a ton of things, because you post your episodes and stuff on there. And the different things that you talk about. I did not realize that there was that many places around Florida that had legends to them like that.
Neither did I. When I came to Florida, I am in the lowest cultural point in all of Florida. And there's two reasons for that. One, it just has no culture. Like it hasn't been around enough. It doesn't have, because I live in Cape Coral, Florida, because it's so cookie cutter, it doesn't have any personality to it. But the other part is that people here, and I'm in Lee County, Florida, are transient, right? The majority of the houses are owned by people who don't live in this country, right? They just buy them and rent them out. The other part of them are people who have been here for 5 or 6 years. You don't drive around and see, Miami Dolphins or Tampa Bay Buccaneers stickers. You see from wherever the people are, and obviously we have a huge season where there's nothing but tourists, right? Where you can't drive on the street because all the snowbirds come down. And so when I first got here, for my first 6-7 years, I thought there were no ghostly folklore. There were no ghost stories to tell about places here in Florida. And the interesting thing that I found out is that once you open the can of worms, and most importantly, once you get out of the cities and you go to the places where people have lived for 2 or 3 generations and had time to spread these stories onto other people, that's when it really explodes. And it makes sense because the state is so huge and it's so diverse in terms of, people who live on the water versus people who are living in the central part of the state. The Panhandle is entirely different than the East Coast, which is different than the Gulf Coast. And so, you get very similar legends, which is why I'm able to write an entire book of love stories. But they have a certain flavor of whatever area that they're from.
Right. You have, and I didn't catch where it was actually from, the Cursed Children of Coker Cemetery in Arcadia.
Yes, Arcadia, Florida. That's really interesting you should say that, because I just got an email yesterday about a follow-up of that. Yeah, that's, it's once you write a book about haunted Florida love stories and you send it to the publisher and you send it off, and then all of a sudden you find one the next week, and then you find one 4 weeks later, and then it's like, oh wow, I could do a follow-up already with the amount of stories I have. And one of them is this Coker Cemetery, which for decades was allowed to just completely go into ruin. Recently, the Historical Society and the Cemetery Society, which Arcadia has because it's so history-based, has been able to go in and fix things up, and they've put a fence around it, and now they're maintaining the graves. But it is literally a family plot in the middle of an orange grove, right? And so if you don't know what you're looking for, if you don't specifically go there for that, then you would completely miss it. So it's a law that they have to maintain, and they can't plow over the graves. But that doesn't mean they have to take care of it. So the people who own the grove never took care of it. They just allowed it to, go completely wild. And the story that goes with it is that, pretty close to the 1920s, 1930s, there was a family there known as the Lotts. And they were just kind of starting out, and they didn't have a lot of money. And the mother was pregnant. And a gypsy, now you can replace gypsy with Jewish person, with black person, with foreigner, like whatever you want, because this is the story of the outsider, and then who the bad guy, quote unquote, bad guy is changes. And he was hired by the Lotts to work on their farm for a week. So he was fixing this, and he was helping to install this, and he was working on the field a little bit. And at the end of the week, he wanted his money. And Mr. Lott said, absolutely not. And he said, yes, you will. And he took out his shotgun and said, absolutely not. And so as the guy was leaving, he yelled back. He was looking at the mother, and he yelled back and said, the baby inside you will not live to be a year old. And from now until the day you die, you will never be able to have children. And he drove off. And the baby was born, and right before her first birthday, she passed away. And then they had another child, and that child passed away. And then they had another child, and they made it just past the year mark, and that child got sick, and that child died. So in this cemetery, there are a whole bunch of Eckermans or aldermans. There's a whole bunch of Cokers, and then there's these 3 lone plots for the 3 Lott children. And it's said that if you go there, you'll see these little balls of light, these orbs, not the kind that you get in photography, but the ones you see face to face. And they'll be dancing around the graves, that they'll be floating. And now the legend says they also open and close the gate and try to escape. People who work in the groves have reported this. People who have gone to the cemetery at night before it was overgrown reported it for years. And it's interesting, when I legend trip, I go out and I do something to try to spark the activity, right? Something that would seem to make sense. And I'm like, well, I can't do yard work, and I'm not a gypsy. So what we did when we went there was we read a kid's book, and we hadn't even planned to do that. We were just kind of going to go there and explore the cemetery as we were on our way to another legend trip we were doing that night. And we happened to stop off at a bookstore, and we got this little kid's book, which was part of the Guardians, what is it called? The Rise of the Guardians series. And it's all about how...
The Owls of Galoo kind of thing?
I can't remember the name of it, but I know that they made a movie out of it. But they have a series of books, and then some of them are kids' books and some are young adult books. But it's like the story of Santa Claus and the Easter Bunny, right,
yeah,
and Jack Frost and everything, yeah. And this story, which I had never even heard of before as part of it, talks about how the moon will come, and then there'll be a rider on the moon, and he'll take all the spirits of the little children and move them off into peace. Didn't even know that was the topic. My co-host at that time didn't know what was going on. She didn't know anything about this legend. And she sat there and she read the story to them. She read the entire book to them. And I'm filming the whole thing. And you can see this on our Facebook page. I'm filming the whole thing. And I swear that as the sun was setting, you could see these little darts of shadow running to the middle of the cemetery where she was reading this book. It was profound, and it was one of those things that I'm like, I am on camera saying, "Did you see that? Like, I've seen these shadows. Do you see that one?" And she's just reading the whole time. And the cemetery itself is actually filled with a ton of children, and so I like to think that at least for one night, like, we gave them a little bit of entertainment.
Huh. Wow.
So, do they come across as actual orbs or like will-o'-the-wisps?
Well, I don't know the distinction that you're making within those two definitions. But they are in Coker. They are probably about the size of a softball, and they float up from the ground, and then they dance, much like the Tomoka Lights. They kind of just dance around there, and they dart behind the headstones, almost as if they're playing hide and seek. Now, the obvious thing to say is, well, if a baby is 1 year old, what's it doing like running around a cemetery, right? Like. And I firmly believe it's actually not the lot children. I think it's the children that the other children that are buried there who are older. However, and this is the essence of what I do, when you experience the paranormal, most people, they don't have a frame of reference for it. They don't have experience or the vocabulary even sometimes to describe what they're seeing. And so what they do is they fall back on stories that they've heard. And so this story is a really good example of they're seeing these lights. They can't explain them. Wait a minute. There are these 3 graves that don't belong to the family that the rest of the cemetery is. It must be them. And then a story develops around it that is similar or familiar, I should say.
Wow. Barbara?
Well, I was just, the skeptic in me comes out and says, well, what about the ground level there? And what's the water table like? And are you just getting swamp gas?
Yeah, maybe. I don't know. Doesn't matter to me. I'm a folklorist. No, and that's the honest to God truth. Once again, that goes back to what I was saying about investigating, is that as a folklorist, I could care less whether something is really happening or not, whether the ghost is real or not. It's all about the story that the people are telling and exploring that. But what I would say to that is, I'm not quite sure if swamp gas can explain the shadows that I was seeing kind of scurrying around the headstones going towards it. Can explain some of the lights. Can it explain the Tomoka lights? Can explain, yes. And I think the interesting thing is, I'm doing an entire chapter. I'm currently working on a book just about the Ocala National Forest, because there are just so many ridiculous stories coming from that and the surrounding area. And I'm doing an entire chapter on just ghost lights, just the stories of ghost lights that people have told me. And I have never, and Barbara, maybe you can correct me on this, I have never heard of swamp gas being consistent or as active and moving and seeming to have a personality, or being able to be repeated in a lab. And so it's always presented as this scientific explanation for why a paranormal thing can't happen, and it does happen in nature. And so it's not like it's a fake thing, and yet just because it can be used to explain away what people are seeing, I don't think it does. There's
Old Faithful. There's geysers out there which will build up and build up and build, and then they explode. So you can have frequency to that sort of thing as well, where there is a buildup of gas, etc., and then it finally explodes. Now, personality, we anthropomorphize a lot of things.
Definitely.
So that's part of it too. So but there's always the possibility that there's something else is real. Yeah.
And I also, I wonder if people have experienced this and whether they have actually experienced it, or whether it's kind of a crossover to another story which exists maybe 3 miles away in another cemetery, which also has a very similar story, only this time it was 7 children who were poisoned, and it all died on the same day. I shouldn't say that. One survived for 2 days afterwards. And it's an almost identical story in terms of the way that the balls of light move and the idea of the hiding behind the headstones. And for me, I almost personally feel that someone had an experience there. And then they see these 3 graves that they can't explain, which I can now explain as of yesterday. And they associated it with the other story, and the 2 stories got mixed and matched. And as an investigator, that would infuriate me. But as a folklorist, I'm like, oh wow, look at the way these 2 stories in 2 different locations are totally dancing with each other.
Sure. There's that fine line with mythology, and because a lot of it is based on an actual event. which is retold to explain something. In the old days, it would be what the gods did, but in this case, it could be what spirits are doing.
And that's the essence of writing the Haunted Love book, is that, on one hand, love and obsession and hate, which is the other side of love, are all the kind of emotions that would be primed to cause a ghost and be primed to make a location haunted, or someplace you would return to, or a reason for your return. And then on the other hand, love stories are, and especially some of the ones that make up the backstories of these hauntings, are the most familiar stories you've ever heard. And so when something happens and someone says, oh, you know what that is? They loved each other and they ended up committing suicide. You say, I can buy that. Yep, okay. I believe the haunting or especially the haunted legend, because that story makes sense to me. So I feel those two things are kind of working with each other in a lot of the stories in the book.
Sure. The name of the doctor, no, actually he was a radiologist. The guy that stole the body of the woman he was obsessed with.
In Key West?
In Key West.
Yes. I can't remember the name, but I know the story that you're talking about. That's just freaky.
Yeah, really freaky. But the question is I think she was entombed there, and he stole the body out of that, and kept going back constantly. And her father finally caught him. Why isn't that haunted, or is it?
Well, one reason why it's not haunted is because she's not there. That the headstone and I'm not sure if it's a crypt or a mausoleum is still there, but because of all that, they took her body and they moved it someplace else.
Right.
And the second answer to that might be there is so much activity in that cemetery that I'm not quite sure you could even separate the stories as to who exactly is haunting which location of that. But what happens is, and actually I would say the opposite of it, what happens is that I've heard that she is there, and I've heard that he's there even after death. He returns to the cemetery, and that's what people use to explain some of the ghosts they see in there.
Oh, okay.
And if you're ever talking about, a lot of the book has to do with disturbed graves. You know what I'm saying? Like, a lot of them have to do with disturbed temple mounds and sacred places to the Native Americans in different areas in Florida. But in essence, like, that cemetery, probably more than most cemeteries I can think of, has been disturbed so many times because it seems to be hit so often with with hurricanes, that they're constantly having to rebuild it and find where the bodies are. And last time I went there, it was just after Irma, and there were just piles of rubble, and they didn't even know where certain parts of headstones went. But it was like, trying to create a puzzle without the picture on the box of where some of these graves might be and things that they found. So it's the essence of an American version of a disturbed cemetery.
Yeah. Well, in knowing some people in Key West, it seems to me that was sort of accepted. They have a different attitude than most people.
Yeah. It's like, funny because the same can be said about where the lighthouse is. If you ask anyone, there are 2 dead bodies on that in that area, or 200 dead bodies on that area. There are so many legends about people going there and dying. There's of course, the most famous of these legends is that during one of the huge hurricanes back in the 1830s, the lighthouse keeper lost all of her children in the hurricane, as they were all in there, and the lighthouse got destroyed. And they had also allowed some people to take cover there because it was the only structure still standing, and all those people died. And so their spirits are kind of left on that property, and they continue to walk that property. The children are heard crying sometimes. The people are seen on the benches, and of course, none of that is actually true. When most of the people, there were 1 or 2 that died, but most of the people actually survived when the lighthouse crashed. And so, but it's one of those things where people know that it crashed. It's part of their history. Everything is kind of loose there in terms of what is history and what is story. And they want it that way because it adds to kind of the artistic flavor of the location. And so that's how you get really great haunted stories, and in this case, love stories.
Yeah. Well, it must be interesting too to have to figure out in your research what was actual folklore handed down generation and what's made up for modern tourists.
You know, it's interesting because when I'm in front of an audience, like doing a live presentation, remember when you could actually speak in front of people before you had to wear a mask everywhere? When I would speak in front of an audience, what I discovered was that they absolutely loved when I would tell the story and then I would go, nope, but that's not what really happened. And I would tell them the real history and why the story that's the popular story couldn't possibly be true. And I would lay it all out, and the live audience would love it. And they would almost like be in the know, like, now we know it too. And it's interesting because I find that when people read these stories, they don't like that part as much. There's a portion of people who absolutely love that you have gone into the story and you've basically found that it's not true, but it's still kind of an interesting story and maybe some weird stuff is still happening. The live audience loves it. I almost feel like some of the people who read the books when I do that feel cheated, which is totally not my perspective.
Yeah, well, yeah. To know the truth. But you know, it's the expectation too. If you go into what's supposedly a haunted area, and you have the expectation that Joe the ghost is in the attic, and of course you're going to go to the attic and you're going to hear a little creak, and obviously it's Joe.
Right. And that's the flavor that you want, and that's the mood and the aura that you want to create, and you want to go up there and you want to hear that creak, and you want to hear. You want to get on your tape recorder anything that sounds like Joe, right? And how easy is it to get that EVP? And so, you know, you don't want to then sometimes hear that it's not true. And the interesting thing is that most of what I do when I then bring in the folklore and I say here's the folklore, and then here's the history. Most of the time when I do that, but that doesn't explain away why it's happening. All I'm doing is telling you that the story that they're telling is not necessarily true, but there's still some really weird stuff going on.
Yeah. Well, when you get stories like My Little Obsession, which is Robert the Doll.
By the way, I didn't tell you I am drinking from my Robert the Doll cup as we speak.
Ooh. You know, and he is a cute little doll. I'm sorry. But
okay.
I have to wonder what he looks like in mint condition, though.
There's photographs on the internet that can show you what the doll is supposedly like, and it was a doll that was made in Belgium, I believe. And it looks a lot better than he does now, but, you know, age.
Don't we all?
Yeah, no kidding. But, you know, there was a lot of, it's obsession. It's about a man who's in love with that doll that he's had since childhood. But there's, you know, all the stories now of him running around that little tower room that he had.
The artist's house, the attic of the artist's house.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and it's really interesting because for me, I love a good haunted. I wrote a whole book called Haunted Objects. Like I love a good haunted doll story. And when I wanted to fit that into haunted love, the angle of it really was like, as you were saying, the obsession, right? You know, and I mentioned the curse that may or may not be true. That, you know, the housekeeper who was having the affair, who then was fired, so she put a curse on the doll. But I think it's much more about his obsession. And what I found really interesting was not Robert, but people. Right? And people's upset. You were telling me yourself that when you get a friend request from Robert the Doll, you know you have to take it, or else Robert's rules are in effect and something bad is going to happen to you. And to me,
Robert's rules of order.
I literally, when the first time I went to see him, I was watching the people more than I was watching Robert, because I wanted to see their reaction to it and this kind of weird, glassy-eyed effect that he had on people. The very first time I saw Robert, I was in St. Pete, and I was at a paranormal conference. My friend had said, I had just moved down here, and he said, hey, I'm going to be down there. I'm going to be selling some books. Do you want to come hang out with me? I'll get you in free. You can sell some of your books. And I was like, yeah, sure. And I had no idea who Robert was. And I'm sitting there, or and people kept all day asking me to come over and take pictures of them with this doll, right? And I had no idea what it was, right? But I'm not kidding about this. As the day went on, they go, "Hey, take a picture," and then they would giggle and they would say, "Okay, now ask to take the picture and take the picture." And I'm like, "What is going on here?" And at the end of the day, I kid you not, they took Robert out of his case.
Oh my God!
They held him up Simba style, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they marched him around the hall and out the door. And that was the first time, I think the only time Robert in his entire life had left the keys, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know what to make of this, but the person who organized that conference was supposed to originally write Picture Yourself Ghost Hunting, and after that some really weird things happened and he had to back out, and I stepped right in, right?
Of course.
If you go to see Robert, one of the coolest things is the fact that there are page after page after page after page of letters hung up from people talking about bad things that happened to them after they went and saw Robert, and they weren't polite enough and they didn't do things. And now I have been to two Robert. I have loved two women in my life. One is the wife of my children. The other is my old co-host of Tripping on Legends. Both of whom, one of which we went to go see Robert on our 10th anniversary, which was great. Because I had done research, I was able to write off the entire trip of our 10-year anniversary. We got divorced 2 years later. Now, with my co-host, we went down there for a completely unrelated reason. We were like, we have some time. We're right here. Let's see if we can get into the artist's house. And we were the first people to go into the attic since Robert had taken it out, other than the people who owned the house. And we were up in the attic, and there's no mystique to it. It's just an attic. Yeah, we broke up 3 months later.
You see that now, I don't have a fear of Robert. I want to go to Key West, and I want him to sit on my lap, and so I can talk to him. And I want somebody there with a full spectrum camera who can document if there's any change in it.
Yeah, I don't have a fear of Robert either. I just get lonely sometimes now.
It's all because you didn't ask when you took the first photograph.
I asked everything. Yeah, exactly. Some person in St. Pete back in 2007 cursed me.
Wow.
But you see,
when
Robert says, follow this person on Facebook, and then the kicker was Robert started following me on Facebook. I didn't send him a request. He just started following me on Facebook. So,
are you friends, or he's just following you?
No, we're friends. Yeah, I
so
followed him too.
You had to approve it. You invited him in, so you only have yourself to blame.
Yep. Well, but
Wow.
I'll introduce him to Annabelle, and they can go out on a date.
Oh my word! Yeah, and I actually think that Robert's really mad at that, because he used to be the big haunted doll in town, and now she's taken all of his kind of his punch. So.
Yeah, but Annabelle's not in Florida.
No.
Yeah, but when you ask people what's the best haunted doll, they used to say Robert, and now they jump out with Annabelle. But of course, they identify her as the wrong doll. But still, the legend of Annabelle has taken over the legend of Robert, and I don't think that he likes it one bit.
Wow. So now, all the stories that you have on your Tripping Legends page, have you been to those places and researched them and wrote them up?
Yeah. The only ones that are on there that I haven't been to are the ones that I plan to be to. For example, I've never been to the Bellamy Bridge, which is one place that I really wanted to go. We were supposed to go last summer, and we ended up not being able to do it. And then my children and I were supposed to go on spring break, and we had to reduce it to day trips. And the Panhandle is about, that's a little bit outside of Tallahassee, so that's about a 12-hour drive for me.
It is,
But pretty much, I don't talk about a place unless I've been there. And unless it's an open-ended episode. Like we have one, because I'm writing this book and because of travel conditions, I've really been confined to the house for the last 2 months, most weekends, trying to get this done and working on things, and then going to the Ocala But there's this really great Panhandle story that I want to follow up on in this place called Coon Hill Cemetery. And so that's probably the only one, that and the Bellarmine Bridge, that are out there that I haven't been able to actually get to. It's usually, I know I'm going to be able to get to some place, and therefore I write about it so they can then have like the follow-up to it.
Well, I guess a lot of people has heard about this one called the Bunny Man Bridge. Where's that located, and what's the story behind the Bunny Man?
Well, the Bunny Man Bridge is in Texas. It's not in Florida.
I knew it wasn't down there, but I didn't know where it was. Yeah.
I'm pretty sure it's in Texas if I'm getting it right. I might be thinking instead of what the other bridge, the Goat Man Bridge, I think is in Texas. I think the Bunny Man Bridge is in West Virginia. And it is just an extremely haunted place. See, one of the other things that I like to do is when I'm talking about one location that's here in Florida, I'll then bring in other locations. And my children, this is once again, we were set to go to different places. And so we set out, okay, so where do we want to go? What investigations or what legend trips do we want to do? And one of them was they wanted to go to the Bunny Man Bridge because we were planning on going like up and visiting Mothman. And so Bunny Man Bridge I had heard about years before. And, you know, one of the stories has to do with there was an escaped convict and he survived by eating bunnies. Him and another man escaped from either an insane asylum or a jail, depending on which version of the story you go with. And they survived in the woods by eating these rabbits. And so there would be all these dead bunnies on the side and in the woods and at this bridge location until finally one of them turned on the other and they ended up killing their partner and hanging him from that bridge. And it said that if you go at a certain time, and of course the time changes depending on the generations now say it's 3 a.m. as opposed to midnight because, you know, the new generation is obsessed with 3 a.m. If you go there, you will actually see the person hanging and you cannot walk from one end of the bridge to the other underneath without going insane. You will start to hear all the people who have died there because then it extends to anything bad that happens in that area. The Bunny Man did it, right? So if you can make it all the way through, when you get home, the Bunny Man is going to kill you anyway. And so, of course, it's one of those great legend trips that people try to do is they go to Bunny Man Bridge. They try to walk the entire way. They try to, close their eyes or turn their lights on to get a flash of the man that's hanging there. And it really is one of those things that drives the locals crazy and the police crazy. But I don't know many people who have either died there or gone insane afterwards.
And if you die after you go insane, how do they know they went insane?
Well, maybe they do wacky stuff before then, right? I mean, of course, that's always the trick of these legends is that, you know, they say it's like in Pirates of the Caribbean. He's like, well, if all the people died, then how'd the story get out? You know,
I was just about to reference that. Yeah.
Right. You know, it's kind of like I do another story we can get a little more in depth with if you want afterwards after the break. But part of the legend involves a pirate who kidnaps a woman, and it's said that the woman then essentially crashes the ship and all the people that are on the ship dying, and she does a very specific thing in terms of she finds one of those things that digs graves or like punches through metal, and she punches metal into it, and so it's sinking and everyone dies. And I'm like, well, then how do they know that she did that? How do they know how she escaped from her stateroom to get down to the basement? But that legend still persists.
Wow.
Of course. Why don't we take a break and come back and
you want to take a break first? Okay, yeah. We can do that. We can go ahead and take a
Before
break.
Skype kicks me up again.
It'll probably be about 5-6 minutes, something like that. So remember, you won't hear anything, but your mic will be live. And I hope everybody is enjoying the show. I've got another whole page and a half of places to talk about, and so we'll get to those when we come back. So, Jeff, you want to take us out? Barbara?
Jeff? I guess he got kicked off. Well, folks, you're listening to the... Jeff, you back? Nope.
Nope.
Robert got him. Okay, folks, you're listening to the Paranormal View here on the Para-X Radio Network with our special guest tonight, Christopher Balzano, author of his latest book, anyway, at least, is Haunted Florida Love Stories. And we will be right back after a few messages.